What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. My name's Clay.
And I'm Bo.
And today we are doing another vlogcast. Today's topic...
Vampires.
Vampires. So
Bloodsuckers.
vampires... Oh, what's that?
Bloodsuckers.
Bloodsuckers. So vampires for us is a big part of our background as far as what we liked with our reading material, our entertainment value, what games that we like to play. It goes along with our Dungeons and Dragons theme and stuff like that. So let's just get right into it. So just so you know, as you've seen on the disclaimer, for the purposes of this particular vlogcast, we're not going to be concentrating on the actual historical folklore and myths of vampires. It's going to be just modern fiction from like 1801 to present. So none of the actual folklore. We're not going to try and deep dive into, well, you know, what did the ancient Mesopotamians think, you know, or stuff like that. It's not going to be anything like that. So I'm just going to start it out and just ask the question, you know, what is a vampire? Well, you know, for me, the simplest explanation of vampires are creatures that exist by feeding off the essence of other beings, and that usually being in the form of the blood.
Yes.
So
yes, I agree with that. It's they're not all vampires though feed off of blood, as we'll probably hit on in this. I mean, there's other types of vampires that if we get to it, we'll talk about, like psychic vampires that feed off of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So but yeah, it's an essence of a body. It's a person's being that they feed off of. And most of it, they can generalize it as being like the lifeblood is more popular for everything.
Well, right. I mean, I think that, you know, anytime, especially somebody who doesn't know a lot about different possible varieties as far as modern fiction would the roads that it would take you down, they're always going to associate vampire with the blood feeding.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you know, we have had several instances in the past with games that we've played that had something to do with, you know, psychic vampires or emotional vampires or things like that. You know, I feel like you could take things in today's society and put a vampire label on it. Now, I'm not going to call out anything in particular, but you know, there are things in the business side of America that could be considered vampiric. You know, let's just take the... Oh, and again, I don't want to be too specific because I don't want to make anybody mad by any means, especially with something that's supposed to be entertaining. We're supposed to be having a good time. But take the medical industry, for example, and the way the insurance in the medical industry works. Is it possible that, let's say you get an injury and you initially go to the doctor, and then you have to have surgery, and then you have to have physical therapy, and then you have to have continued physical therapy, and then you have to have the therapy that comes after the physical therapy. So not any one person in particular, but is the medical field a possible vampire? You know, is it taking from you when it doesn't necessarily have to? You know, and is it surviving off of what it's telling you that you need?
Right.
And you keep submitting to it like a blood doll to a vampire, you know? So again, if you're in the medical field, that was not intended to...
slight them.
To just slide you in any way. It's just an example of what popped in my head. Could possibly potentially be a modern vampire.
Right.
But for most part, the purposes of this here, we're actually going to talk about the mythical vampire that you know of that has the fangs and drinks the blood and could possibly turn into a bat or something like that. So speaking of turning into a bat or something like that, what else defines what a vampire is? to you? What do you think?
To me, what defines a vampire, there's key points. One, I think of like classic vampires. They were able to turn to bats, like we said. They fed off of blood, couldn't cross running water, sometimes they were able to turn to mist or into a wolf. And they were only allowed to go out at night. They were repelled by the sun because they were creatures of the night, and they supposedly didn't have like a soul or something like that, to where the sun's rays they considered purifying, and it damaged them. So, to me, that's what. Whenever I think of a vampire, I think of the night stalking creatures.
So when you think of a vampire, Dracula typically, or a Dracula type, would typically be what would formulate in your mind.
When someone says something about a vampire, first thing that comes to my mind is the Bela Lugosi's original vampire. That's the first image that pops in my mind.
Now, do you think that is a positive aspect for what Bela Lugosi and Bram Stoker were able to do as far as plant that in your mind, and it's the way they portrayed it was so good that everyone just pictures that when they hear that? Or is that a bad thing that it has now clouded what others could possibly accept as a vampire, as opposed to saying, no, that can't be that because this is what it's supposed to be? Well, that's what it was supposed to be according to Bram Stoker.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, describe what a vampire could be. So, I mean, what is that a good thing? You think that is the first thing you think of? Or is it a clouding thing, maybe?
It was definitely, for some people, I believe it would be more of a clouding thing, because the only reason why I even consider that one as what pops in my head was because that was my first introduction of what a vampire was.
Sure.
Nowadays, people, the young guys and girls out there that comes into it, they have a totally different aspect. They don't even know who Bela Lugosi is. So, they don't picture the same thing. So it's kind of good and bad, but, everyone has their own image of what a true vampire seems like. Some people are going to be looking at the Twilight vampires, as that's the true image.
I was going to bring that up because I want to tie those two things together. All right, so then let's just go right into that. Okay, the Twilight vampires. Most people, well, a lot of people, I don't guess I'm going to say most, a lot of people have looked at that and said, that is not a vampire. Those are not vampires. Vampires are supposed to roast in the sunlight. They're repelled by crosses and, and all that kind of, stuff. It did not fit the classical role of the vampire like they were used to seeing, such as, the badass vampire like with the Lost Boys or, something along that lines. But the first thing, let me throw this out there. Okay, so first thing with Stephenie Meyer's Twilight Vampires. Did she give a nod to the original Dracula, Bela Lugosi, by naming her main character Bella?
Good possibility. That's a very good possibility.
See, and I haven't done any research on that. I don't know that. And honestly, a while ago when you said Bela Lugosi, that was honestly the first time I'd even thought about it. I was like, I wonder if that was her way of paying homage to Bram Stoker and the original Dracula, and if that was how, she come up with the name for her main character.
That's a good point.
And it could be. It could actually be, like something on real quick on Wikipedia, and they're, everybody's like, well, yeah, of course, ain't you read that? Well, no, I haven't. But anyway, so with her vampires and the fact that they get made fun of a lot, because of the when they go out in the sunlight, they sparkle. You know, knowing what I know about the fictional vampires that we know of with the games that we've played and with the movies that we've watched and the shows that we've seen or the books that we've read, I feel like the fact that those vampires can walk out into the sunlight and not be destroyed is a huge freaking bonus.
Definitely, they've got to pass the whole hindrance, because that really is the number one thing that vampires supposed to desire and fear at the same time.
Right. And so I can indirectly see where the sunlight could still destroy them, because if the sunlight shines on them, somebody sees it, it puts them in danger of now being recognized as something other than human. So indirectly, yes, the sun could still be the cause of the death of one of Stephenie Meyer's vampires. However, it's to me, just for that vampire to have the ability to walk out in the sun if he wanted to is a huge advantage over the vampires that couldn't.
Yes.
You know, and again, they get made fun of, you know, for that. And I get it. I understand. I'm not saying that is what a true representation of a vampire is, but that is her take on what the vampire is, and it was her way of being creative and giving it something without just carbon copying somebody else's idea of what a vampire is.
Right.
You know? So, again, looking at how many times or how much over the years those vampires have gotten made fun of, I don't know anybody who actually said some of the things they said that, had the situation had been a reality, would have made fun of that vampire to his face for the fact that he sparkled.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think they would have done anything like that. Yes, it's fun. It's easy to make fun of something that you know you have no worries that it's going to come back and get you. But if in reality, if one of those vampires was here and you found out, you would probably be still shitting your pants a little bit, because you know what they can do.
Right. And I feel like they had the ability to, not just from the sunlight, but in all aspects, hide themselves a little more than the classical vampire that more people would lean toward by saying, you know, that wasn't a real vampire. The Lost Boys vampires were real vampires. Well, in essence, the Lost Boys vampires, yes, I'm a huge fan, and I'm never not going to say that I'm not a huge fan. Love it, and it gets my excitement level up. You know, anytime I hear a song that played in the Lost Boys, or anytime I see a clip of it on TV, you know, or whatever, yes, I still love it. But they were all destroyed.
Yes.
And fairly easily by a couple young punks who had water pistols. How many young punks in the Twilight series with water pistols killed a single vampire?
Very true.
So, I mean, just because it didn't have the expectation of what a person was used to seeing by that time didn't take away from the fact that these were badass vampires. All right.
That's true.
So we'll leave that alone, because you guys may have already turned it off by now because you think we're in the corner of the sparkling vampires. Not necessarily. It's just to say this is another take of what a vampire could possibly be. Again, this is all fiction, so who's to say that that couldn't be, you know, a take on what a vampire actually is. Correct. So, since we brought up Lost Boys, we brought up Twilight, what's some of the other vampires from, let's call it entertainment fiction, that really come to mind when you think about them, other than Dracula, and then the Lost Boys, then the Twilight vampires? What else?
One of the other big ones that really didn't get portrayed that he was a vampire, but more of a vampire hunter, was Blade.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Blade was a vampire who hunted vampires.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was a good classic type character too. You know, he couldn't get in the sunlight. He had a lot of the classic stuff, but I don't think he couldn't turn into bat or turn mist. I don't think, but he had like the supernatural strength.
Mm-hmm.
He needed to feed on blood, but he didn't just feed on anybody.
Right.
So, I mean, to me, he was another depiction of a regular vampire. He wasn't a classic vampire. What people would think would be the classic.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, I honestly do not believe there's a cookie cutter type of vampire.
And I don't believe there is either, but a lot of people are going to go back to Dracula and say that, yes, that is the cookie cutter vampire because they feel like that is the first in the line of, American modern fiction vampires. When in fact, okay, so let's go back to just real quick for the Twilight vampires. One of their things is, okay, yeah, vampires aren't supposed to be able to go out in sunlight. Vampires aren't supposed to be able to cross running water, or they're supposed to have these fear of crucifixes, or they can't eat food and drink, human drink and stuff like that. Well, what a lot of people don't know is in modern fiction, which is, 1801 and to today, is that there were vampires in fiction before Dracula. And one of the first was Varney. That's a V, A-R, V as in Victor, A-R-N-E-Y, Varney the vampire. I'm not talking about this guy dressed in a purple suit with fangs and I love you and you love me. I said Varney the vampire. Now, with Varney came several years before Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Varney could go out in sunlight. Varney could consume human food and drink. Varney was not repelled by crosses or running water, and he did not have fangs. So, and that was before Dracula. So, where some people say that doesn't fit the classical original role of a vampire, well, that's not exactly accurate because Varney, again, came before Dracula. And it was explained that he could do that stuff in order to help hide what he actually was. And he could blend into society better.
Right.
Because of the fact that he could go out in sunlight and he could eat and drink human food and drink and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily agree. Yes, Dracula is definitely the one that put it on the map, obviously, because everybody's heard of Dracula, nobody's heard of Varney.
Right.
All right. So, but I don't buy the argument, well, that's not what the classical vampire is, because it was before what most people consider the classical vampire.
Very true. Very true. And I agree with you that since I was one, before vampires have changed whenever I was growing up, from the Bram Stoker's vampire to nowadays types of vampires, I'm more open-minded.
Mm.
It doesn't take much. I mean, I always try to look at something and keep an open mind, keep my judgments low, because I don't like to stereotype or to place it in. It's either this way or no way.
Right.
I'm just not that type of person. So it doesn't surprise me, and I like the different avenues that people take for depicting vampires. What they can do, can't do. I'm interested in hearing someone else's image of a vampire, what they think should be a vampire.
And I feel the same way, because I think if we watch different TV shows but see the same character over and over and over and over and over again, it's eventually just going to burn out. I mean, yeah, okay, the first time we watched Lost Boys, again, oh my God. But if they continue to make different movies and don't necessarily use the same characters, but try to revamp try to revamp the Lost Boy vampire every single time, it's eventually going to lose its flavor. I mean, to me, that's what makes that so good, is because Lost Boy's vampires.
Yes.
But if you keep creating it, it loses what it originally was. So I agree with that. I love the fact that different people try to describe or portray vampires in a different light from what they were previously portrayed. So, for example, True Blood.
Yeah.
Southern Louisiana vampires. All right, so did you watch any of True Blood on HBO?
I probably watched about 3 seasons.
3 seasons? It's been a long time since I watched a lot of it. Here recently, I did watch a couple episodes. But, those were more of the, classical role style vampires. However, there were some things with those vampires that weren't necessarily characteristic of some of the more classical vampires as far as weaknesses, like silver. They had a silver to weakness in True Blood. Most vampires that we know or that we think of when we talk about vampires don't have a weakness to silver.
Right.
It's now they still had to drink the blood or the true blood, or something sustaining that was similar to that. They could still die from something being, staked through their heart. They still had this aversion to sunlight, but they had this thing with silver.
Right.
So that is something that they were able to put on that vampire that give it its own quality and difference. Now, some of your more classical viewers are going to sit there and go, but that's not right. But who's to say that's not right?
Right.
I mean, it's just another take on what this person has tried to create their own design.
To cookie cut a vampire to us, like, this is the way a vampire should be, would be the same thing as saying cookie cutting a human being.
Right.
This is how a human being should be. No, there are so many different types of human beings. Why can't there be so many different types of vampires?
Right.
To me, it's just, you can't box it into one neat little cube and definition and say, this covers all vampires. No, it don't. True, vampires are supposed to be creatures that survive off of some kind of essence from others. I don't think that's really changed between other people's vampires.
Right.
They have to survive off of some other person or creature's blood, energy, whatever, to survive. So that's the only thing I think is like a constant in all of the different vampires. I could be wrong. There could be some that people put out there that they're not. But the way I'm understanding it, most of them are that way.
But how would we know?
Right.
I mean, it's not like, because, people sit here and have these discussions as if there is a real vampire that they can go and compare this to. If a vampire actually existed, which we'll get to that later, if a vampire actually existed, do you think it would fit the mold that most people think of when they think of vampires? I mean, from everything that we know of vampires, from entertainment, from games, from movies, from novels, the main goal is to not be found out.
Correct.
So, how do we know?
You know what? Maybe we ought to interview a vampire.
We could interview. We're verging on copyright, but we verge on copyright almost every video we upload. But that would be great if we could sit down with a bloodsucker
and question them.
So if anybody's watching this and you're an actual vampire, get a hold of us. Hey, but anyway, I don't understand how we would know either way. I think it's kind of like what you said earlier. It's what you originally get fed that is what you believe or how you initially perceive what a vampire should be. You have to have, you have to have some sort of imagination to think about vampires anyway. So how a person could not have enough imagination to think that there could be differences,
Correct.
I don't get that. Yes, I understand that some people are just really diehards and they want their vampires to be this.
Right.
But what if it's not?
There's nothing saying it has to be a certain way.
I don't think so either. I'm just as happy with Stephanie Meyer's Twinkling vampires as I am with the Lost Boy vampires. Now, people are looking at me right now going, I just don't get that. What it is a story about vampires. And I'm more happy that I have more source material to go to than not having that source material to go to. So, that's what it boils down to for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So we've discussed several different things here. I'm going to pitch just a couple more that we can think of off the top of our heads. One topic in particular being something that we could probably do an entire separate vlogcast on. But vampires that we grew up with in Vampire the Masquerade.
Yes, that game, it's a role-playing game that was created by White Wolf. And that system there took the idea of vampires. Just didn't stop there where a character could play a vampire, but you choose the society of what type of vampire you want to play. And when we were introduced to that opened up the doors to all of these different types of vampires over the different stages that they were depicted. Mm-hmm. You could play a classic Bram Stoker's type vampire if you want to. You could play the Nosferatu vampire from that old black and white movie with the
Nosferatu.
Yeah, the Nosferatu movie. You could play a Lost Boy type vampire.
Right.
You could play a wild vampire, one that was born in the wilderness and stuff. There were so many different types that you could choose from. And to me, that opened up the door, and that really opened up my eyes on the different types there could be and how it made sense. They made it make sense why they all had to drink blood of some sort. They all could not go out in the sunlight. It did damage. But the number one thing they were all fighting for, unless they were Sabbat or something like
unless
that.
They were not.
Yeah, but the majority of them were all trying to hide from society being picked out, knowing that vampires exist, werewolves exist, ghosts exist, wizards exist. They didn't...
Which is what the Masquerade was.
Yes.
You are trying to portray better than what you actually are. You're trying to portray something that you're not better than what you actually are to hide the fact of what you actually are. So, one of the things that I really liked about the Masquerade system, the Vampire the Masquerade system, is if you're not familiar with it, was they basically took an entire society and interblended it with normal world society. And it was almost like two separate, I don't want to say timelines, what's the word? Like two separate planes of existence, but combined them into one.
Right.
To where like a human could walk down the street and a vampire could almost walk down the same section of the street and you not even know it.
Right.
Because they were so good at hiding what they were. And they had their own system of government. And they had their own laws and their own rules that they followed. And part of the Masquerade, which made it so difficult for them, was the fact that they also still had to follow the laws of regular human people and regular American government or whatever. I say America because that's where most of our games were set in. But, if you were from China and you were playing Vampire the Masquerade, well, you probably set yours in China, and that's obviously fine. But to me, that is what made playing one of these vampires in the game, and just from looking at them from a fictional part of modern fiction vampires or whatever, I think that makes them super interesting. And like I said, the fact that they had to uphold their own laws and government while at the same time follow regular laws and government, but remain hidden from both. It's I just think that's really, really cool aspect, because it really puts, to me, so much more drama in the life of a vampire. It's not just like, okay, it's now 8:30 p.m., it's dark, I'm going to get up, I'm going to fly out of my cave, I'm going to go kill some good-looking woman, I'm going to drink her blood, and I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to hang upside down and sleep all day. This put a real-life dramatic turn on what a vampire was or could do.
Right.
And I think that if people needed just a little bit more example of what we're talking about when it comes to this, is they tried to do a TV series on this back years ago, and they actually did one season. I think it had like 8 episodes.
Something like that.
And a series of unfortunate events, I feel like anyway, led to them not continuing with the series. But had they continued, I feel like it's one of those that could have possibly potentially ran for 10 to 12 seasons. I think they could have had enough interest and enough level of, just interest to be able to continue and do that. But anyway, try to find that if you're interested. It's called, again, Vampire the Masquerade. I'm going to put a link in the video description for where you can maybe find it on Amazon or something like that. But I would highly encourage you, if you have not seen the series Vampire the Masquerade, to pick that up some way. Maybe try to find it on YouTube or some sort of streaming platform, if there is one that has it, and watch those episodes so you know a little bit more about what we're talking about and see what kind of vampires there actually was. Because like Bo said, there was different types. You had the business type. Then you had the more wild character type who it was more typical of to change into a bat or into a wolf or something like that. Then you had the guys who were not just business, but they were also tough. Then you had these crazy vampires, Then you had the typical, like he said, the ugly vampires, where you had the Nosferatu or the Tremere or the Sesame, or whatever, the ones that just were hideous. So I would encourage you to watch that. I think it's really, really good, and will give you a really good idea of one of the things that Bo and I really go to when we hear vampire. But anyway, that's my thought on Masquerade.
Yeah, and what I liked also about the Masquerade, I think was a turning point for this, was saying a vampire, the hardest thing for a vampire to hide is its feeding. The Masquerade took that and worked with it and made it to where it wasn't such a challenge. Because in the game, you're able to seduce a man or a woman, feed off of them. They would enjoy every bit of it. Then you could lick the wound and it heals it. And they have no memory. They might feel tired or something wore down, but they have no memory, like they had a night of drinking a lot. And to me, that was a key point of helping make the game good. Now, you have some that if you didn't want to lick the wound, you didn't, and you have a chance of putting that, what they call the veil, lifting that veil, and people sitting there going, wait a minute, I've got vampire bites, and they started looking into it. So that's one thing I liked about it.
Yeah, me too. I feel like by having the retainers or the blood dolls or whatever they were referring to them as at the time. I know we did have retainers in that game that you had for just that purpose. It took it took the desire, well, not the desire, but it took the need to go out and make feeding your main priority, and you could actually then live life without having to worry so much about where your next meal is going to come from, or
Correct.
without having to possibly make a headline and putting yourself in danger, or whatever. It was a better way to hide who you were, but then also be able to enjoy other parts of life for a vampire. And for the typical vampire in the Masquerade series, that's a pretty long life. Because like most vampires, they have immortality. So
Correct.
Just not being able to die naturally. Now, I played many characters that still died, but it's because I usually did something stupid or, something that a vampire himself probably wouldn't do, but when you take a human and have him play a vampire, you see, they like to do things that they probably really shouldn't. So,
yes.
But so anyway, that's another area, a huge area for us, especially with what we're doing, with our Dungeons and Dragons theme and our gaming theme in general. The Masquerade vampires for us were huge. But moving on, then you have, I guess you have some vampires that are typical, but a little bit atypical. So let's look at, let's say Castlevania, for example, the video game Castlevania.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Castlevania, I don't remember 100% sure, but I know that it wasn't like the main protagonist, Dracula himself.
Supposed to be, yeah.
And then was the one going after him in Castlevania, was he a vampire?
I've never really played the game as much, but I'm wanting to say yes. That you find out later on that he was actual vampire and he was trying to go after this evil vampire, basically.
Okay. Well, I mean, are there any other vampires off the top of your head that you can think of?
Different types. The only other ones I could think of is like we have this movie that just got released. It was Marvel Comics, Morbius.
Mm-hmm.
Now he depicts a different type of vampire.
Right.
It used the idea of having some kind of disease. He shot himself with like the blood and genes of a vampire bat, and it turned him into the person he is, and he has to feed off the blood. So that was another depiction of vampires.
Mm-hmm.
Besides that, I'm sure there was many others, and I'm sitting here trying to think over video games and different things of what different vampires there were,
right.
And I'm just drawing a blank, and I'm sure I'm going to think of them.
I mean, there's several others in the entertainment industry. I mean, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer, number one. Then you had what was it, like the Dark Knight series, I believe was what it was called, where there was like a police detective that played a vampire. Then what's a couple of the other ones? Would be, oh gosh. Well, and just go ahead.
You had the one Johnny Depp, Dark Towers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He was a vampire in that.
Yeah.
And then there's another one that I just started watching. I think it was on Hulu, called What We Do at Night or something like that. And it's a comedy, basically, depicting about a group of vampires living together. So you have different shows. Some are big, some are not so big shows, but they all depict different types of vampires and different things they go through.
Yeah. Well, there's some people watching this right now who are going, I can't believe he hasn't mentioned Anne Rice yet, and Lestat, or Louis, or, Interview with the Vampire. But we kind of did earlier,
yes.
When we hinted at, Interview with the Vampire. We just didn't go into Anne Rice and her depiction of vampires. Because, when it comes to Anne Rice and her vampires, I feel like for the most part they had that good classical feel to them. They couldn't go out in the sunlight.
Mhm.
They had to feed off of blood, whether it be human or animal or whatever. So I have no problem with Anne Rice vampires. I really loved both the movies that got released of it, Interview with the Vampire, Queen of the Damned. But I think if I had to pick a favorite, it was definitely Interview with the Vampire. I mean,
Mine too.
what Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise did with that movie was just, great. The portrayal of the vampires was great. I mean, it's just so. There you go for you Anne Rice fans out there. And again, I'm not taking anything away from Anne. I love her writing. I've read most of her books. Love the movies. But that's just, another take on the entertainment fictional vampire. But we could go on and on and on with vampires themselves and somebody's take on them and, the differences and whatnot. But it leads me to ask you this, with so many different vampires and so many different movies or TV shows or books or games that has something to do with vampires. What is it that makes the vampire, at least in my opinion, I feel like it is, so much more popular than other forms of supernatural themed shows or books or something like that? Now, I don't want to take anything away from what The Walking Dead did with zombies, but when it comes to an intelligent sort of supernatural, the zombie's not going to be, for the most part, an intelligent supernatural like, But anyway, what makes the vampire stand out for more people than a werewolf or a ghost or any other thing, a changeling, or any other thing in the supernatural genre? What makes the vampire stand out to grab people's attention or easier to write about, maybe?
To me, and this is strictly my opinion, I think it's the vainness a lot of times.
Did you say vainness?
Vainness.
Vainness.
Of people wanting to portray something that vampires have always been portrayed as being very beautiful, or handsome. They look human.
I think that's a big part of
that. To me, I think it's just the whole. They feel connected more to a vampire than, like, let's say, someone who could turn into a werewolf.
Yes, because
they have to shape into this creature. It's not as appealing as, well, I have to drink blood, but I still look good, and I'm still looking like a human. I mean, to me, that's what I think it is.
Oh no, I agree. I agree 100%. I honestly do think it's because people can relate to vampires more than they can, well, like you said, like a werewolf, because they can see where the vampire creature is in most cases not as the werewolf,
right?
Or something like that. I think you're right, though. I think it is because of that. I would like to see. I would like to see more done with werewolves, or I would like to see more done with, gargoyles, or something like that of the supernatural side of things.
Right.
But I can always see where the vampire is just going to be the top dog when it comes to what somebody's going to write about or what somebody's going to make a movie about or, whatever.
It's always going to be popular.
Do you think what do you think the more common example would be if somebody had an actual fear as a child? Do you think more people were scared of vampires or scared of the possibility of werewolves?
Comparing to those two, to me, I think they would be scared more of werewolves, just for the simple fact that just having a big creature that doesn't look human standing over your bed would scare the hell out of you. But I gotta say, if you wake up and you got a human standing over your bed looking at you, you would probably still...
You would still be scared.
Right.
But probably less reactive to a human standing there, or a human looking standing there, than a hairy walking dog.
Correct.
You know. So, so individual vampires, do you have, like, I know you said earlier, you know, when you think of one just off the top of your head, you usually picture the initial Bela Lugosi Dracula. But do you have, like, a favorite vampire or a favorite group of vampires? Or, you know, what would be your go-to if you said, you know, if you were talking to somebody that had no idea what a vampire was, for whatever reason, they lived a sheltered life, what would you describe to them and what would you present to them?
That is a difficult question just for the way you asked it. Now, if I had a choice...
I didn't mean to be difficult.
Well, no, it was just like if I was explaining it to someone else, I would hate to narrow it down to strictly my favorite. But, like, let's say if I was to... I came across this. When we first got into Vampire the Masquerade, I got to choose what type of vampire I wanted to play. And it did not take me but just a second to figure it out. And it was the Bruja, which are the Anarchs, which were modeled after the Lost Boys type vampires. Something about that rebellious, leather-wearing, just... you know, tough acting vampires that appealed to me. And my character will go down as one of my favorite characters I've ever played. And he was a Bruja. He had a temper, but it wasn't like he wasn't evil, but he just, you know, he was big, tough. He was just big, tough vampire. And that, to me, I would depict that as my favorite type, but hands down.
I got you. That's interesting. I mean, I guess I kind of thought you may have leaned that way because I would lean the same direction. You know, my favorite vampire types came from Vampire the Masquerade. But it was just because I spent so much time there. I think, you know, if it was if that was not an option on the table, because of what we do and what we're based on, I would say my favorite one is Strahd from Dungeons and Dragons. You know, Strahd is the most powerful, most popular vampire in the Dungeons and Dragons system. And so, to me, and while he does portray and obtain the qualities of a Dracula, you know, or a classical vampire. I'm getting to the point where I don't like the term classical vampire. But that would be taking, you know, Masquerade off the table. I would go with Strahd, and I would, you know, explain it that way. Because I just feel like if people knew Strahd or knew the vampire or the Dungeons and Dragons system and knew how evil he was, but just because he's evil didn't mean that it was always about killing someone or taking their head off, or, you know, it's kind of like cat and mouse with Strahd. I mean, he was so evil that he would allow you to know that you were going to die 15 years before you died, and then you had the next 15 years to worry about that, you know, but he still gave you another 15 years.
Right. True.
So it wasn't like he was so evil that he was just going to immediately extinguish you. He made you freaking think about it for so long and try to come up with a way to get out of, you know, whatever pact you were in with him in order to survive. But so for me, I think I would go with Strahd. But most, well, you know, it's hard to say what most of our viewers are going to know. If you base it just on Dungeons and Dragons, and a lot of people are here for Dungeons and Dragons, they're going to know who Strahd is.
Yes.
If they're here for Dungeons and Dragons, they're probably also going to know what Masquerade vampires are.
Correct.
So, if we took Masquerade and Dungeons and Dragons out of the equation, who is your favorite vampire?
Type of vampires.
Yes. Type or vampire or, whatever. Like, for example, mine, I think most people are going to say the Lost Boy vampires. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that if that is your favorite. Absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I think mine would probably be Dracula. I hate to say that, but anytime anything comes up about Dracula, I'm either going to read it or watch it. I can't say the same thing about every other vampire, but guaranteed if something comes up about Dracula, I'm going to watch it or check it out, or whatever.
Right. Mine, I like a lot of different types of vampires, but one of my favorites that I think is underrated, and people, it was popular here and there, but it really didn't stay in popularity like the others, was Blade.
Yeah, Blade's really cool.
To me, Blade was a very complex person. I mean, you had to be a complex person to fight against your own natures to kill things that are just like you. Because you do not believe, because you kept your humanity. And you don't want to succumb to the basic instincts that vampires have, as to drink blood and to survive over everything.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that he is one of my favorite vampires who really doesn't portray as being a vampire.
Right. Yeah, and I do think a lot of people have forgotten about Blade over the years, as far as his place in the vampire lore. I think he would have made a better. I almost think he would have made a better character with a little bit more of the vampire part, as opposed to where he tried to play more humanity. But again, I understand that's the way the character was designed. I would have just played it a little bit more of the vampire part, because to me, if you're trying to contain what you are and you're trying to defeat what you are, I feel like the fight with what you are needs to be a little bit more prominent.
Mm-hmm.
So I just feel like if they'd have had a little bit more of the actual vampire in him show every now and then, I think I would have liked that a little bit more. But I completely agree with you. I mean, it's definitely a pickable favorite vampire or whatever. So let's try to start wrapping things up here just a little bit. One of the questions that I want to ask, and a lot of you may look at this question and go, "Is he serious?" Yes, I am. Bottom line, do you think there is a possibility that there is such thing as a real vampire out there?
That could be a whole segment question by itself. Because my belief ties in with a lot of other things.
Sure.
Do I believe that there is existence of vampires? Truly, no. I do not believe there's a such thing as vampires. But if next week it became public that vampires existed, it wouldn't surprise me. Just because that's also saying there's no such thing as ghosts. There's no such thing as aliens. There's no such thing as werewolves or anything that's unexplainable. It's because we don't have hard proof, and plus there's the whole idea of society as a whole sees vampires as being non-existent.
Right.
They're fiction. So as a collective, that energy gets put out, and that's what makes it a reality. If all of a sudden the veil gets lifted and all of these mythological, supernatural creatures all of a sudden started appearing,
right,
it really wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I would be kind of shocked a little bit, but then I'd be like, you know what? It don't surprise me. It really don't. I'd have to look at things a lot different.
Well, you mentioned something just a second ago, and it kind of sparked something else in my mind. All right, so you mentioned aliens. All right, so do you think with all the vastness in the universe, with all these new images that we're getting from this new telescope that they've just sent out in space and stuff like that, do you believe in any sort of extraterrestrial life? As far as like, can any planet anywhere besides here have some sort of life on it?
Oh, I definitely believe that.
Okay. Could that life be vampiric?
It would not surprise me.
So then, the possibility then of vampires actually existing, I would have to say, would probably then be yes. Because I would think that there is life on other planets, that there's a possibility that that life could be what we know or think of as a vampire.
Correct.
And it would also be a possibility that if we ever run across what we think is a real vampire, it could just in fact be, some sort of alien species. Now, whether or not we'll ever meet or know for sure that other life exists on other planets, but I am a firm believer that other life lives else. And I'm not saying necessarily even walking around life. I just mean life in general as the definition, of life and molecules and the way it works and that sort of stuff. I do believe that they're, I'm not so conceited to think that we are the only life in the universe. That would just be ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think that what we know as vampires is a possibility that could come from some other planet, and right. That is just the natural part of that species and that society. So, I mean, I think anybody who says they don't believe in vampires but believe in aliens, I don't necessarily think that's crazy, but I just don't think they're looking at it as the same thought process as what we just discussed. Well, if you ever did come across some other life on another planet and you brought it here, and the most closely thing that you related to it was a werewolf, well, does that mean that now, all right, that's where that came from? It's humanoid looking, but it can change into this furry thing because of its natural ability from wherever it came from.
Right.
And that's part of what it is. It's like humans grow from babies to mature adults to old people and then, back to nothing again.
Right.
So, I mean, we have a metamorphosis stage ourselves that, it could be the same way with some sort of alien life that actually looks like a vampire or whatever. But
correct.
Anyway. So, the vampires topic of discussion could go for days and days. It's one of those things that, well, I think it's like with anything. I mean, you could bring up any sort of topic and just talk about it for different lines that just branch off from, whatever that is. But I feel like with what Bo and I love about vampires and love about the way they are incorporated in our Dungeons and Dragons campaigns or in our White Wolf campaigns, or in our even our superhero campaigns, because they're, well, he mentioned Morbius earlier, so like some superheroes that are actually vampiric in nature, to real life situations that are vampiric in nature, whether it be this maybe not necessarily evil, but this greedy person that is going to make others feel like, whether it be monetary or emotionally or physically or whatever, feeding off of that and getting this sense of some sort of gratification out of it. So from everything from fictional to that, I think we've covered a lot of what I would consider really good stuff.
Yes.
But he might be looking at it right now going, man, these guys suck. Get it? Because vampires suck.
Big time.
But anyway, guys, we hope that you enjoyed what we did here today with this vampire vlogcast. We are going to definitely continue to do this series. We know now that you have seen our first one, which was Dungeons and Dragons, and now you've seen this one here, which was vampires. We can't wait to sit down once again with a new topic. Let us know what you guys would like maybe to hear us talk for 45 minutes to an hour about. Give us something that we will not necessarily research a lot, but we'll just sit here off the top of our head and go, just have a conversation about whatever it is. We appreciate you being here with us, guys. Make sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, so you know when we put up new videos, and it makes Bo's fangs pop out. Right here on Critical Hits
and Bad Misses.